Hello, I am actually not an English teacher. I probably lied about that in the title, but I will be next year, and I am currently a senior English major at college with a creative writing concentration and a minor in educational studies. Basically, translating beep beep boop boop. I have read and analyzed like 1 million freaking books. I spend like all of my time analyzing and writing about books. And no clickbaity stuff, no exaggerations. From the bottom of my heart, I truly believe that JJK is one of the best written animes ever. I think JJK's characters are incredible. I think it's really strong thematically, and I think its message is one of the most relevant to the political world that we exist in today. However, it's really confusing, right? Like obviously it is incredibly confusing, and it's written in a really obtuse, like non-obvious way that I think anime fans are very much not used to. And since most people kind of just think of it as a fun action anime with great fights, which it definitely is, a lot of fans don't take the extra step to break it down and really give it the analysis effort that it deserves. Good news for you though is today I did all the work. So I'll be breaking down JJK's story so that you're ready for the peak that will be Season 3.
Hello, this is me from the edit coming back to tell you that this is a re-upload. A lot of you probably know this if you're watching this video. This got taken down because of copyright because I used too many clips from the show in it. So if the editing is a little shitty in this, I'm just going to throw a bunch of screenshots over this whole thing just for the sake of getting it back out. So yeah, usually my editing style is a little more high quality. This will be like a recap and breakdown of the first couple seasons, everything really leading up to Season 3. I have some videos on Season 3 on my channel if you're interested in that. I have a new one coming out next week that will be about Hikari and Nobara and Fight Club, all from the perspective of analyzing gender and JJK, so hopefully that's interesting to you. I just want to say thank you all for the support on this video. It meant the absolute world to me. This thing did better than pretty much anything I've ever uploaded on YouTube, so this was a totally awesome experience. I'm really glad that you guys like this one so much. But yeah, today, this video will be breaking down JJK Season 1, 2 in the movie from the perspective of mainly one term, which is
power structure. A power structure is the organization and distribution of power within a society or group, indicating who holds authority and influence over others. So it's who's in control and why. In the US, you can think the government is controlled because we elected these officials to make decisions for us, and large corporations have a lot of power because we give them our money. So you could say that the power structure is based around wealthy corporations and elected politicians. As a subpoint to power structure, we have the term conservatism, which is the commitment to traditional values and ideas with opposition to change or innovation. Try not to get too hung up on the American politics when thinking about that one. Let's go with our definition that we have here today. And keep in mind, if it feels like a lot of stuff is missing from this analysis, it's because we have the second term that's going to happen later in the video. To understand the power structure that exists in the Jujutsu world, we actually have to start with the earliest piece of lore that Gege gives us in the series. That's right, we are taking it all the way back to the Heian era. So the Heian era is a real period of Japanese history that ran from 794 to 1185 AD. For like our Eurocentric history perspective, which isn't always great to go by, but it's what most of us are working with, whatever. The beginning of this period is like Vikings are raiding Northern Europe type beat, and then the end is basically the start of the British Empire. So it's like the dead middle of the medieval times, I think is the best way to remember this. During this time, Japan was ruled by a monarchy that was actually controlled by a couple of powerful clans, namely the Fujiwara clan, who were basically the shadow government that puppeted the monarchy behind the scenes. Very mild manga spoiler here. By the way, no real manga spoilers today in this one. We're only talking about the anime, but this isn't super important, so I'll little spoiler here. But in Season 3, it will actually be said that Yuta is descended from this Fujiwara clan. It's not really a spoiler because it doesn't get explained very much, but it's pretty cool, and it proves that this history was certainly taken into account when Gege was writing Jujutsu Kaisen. These clans established their power in the previous era by buying up a bunch of previously public farmland. And also I lied, this is the actual earliest period of JJK's history. The period right before this is the Nara era. It gets mentioned in Season 2 as the time when Tengen began teaching and founded the Star Religious Group. So during this era, Tengen comes to power and begins building up his barrier techniques, which we know even to the modern day, protect the Jujutsu schools and strengthen the barriers that allow sorcerers to kill curses in secret. They're basically considered extremely important foundations to how the Jujutsu world works. Foundations, you could even call them part of a structure. Wink, wink. In real life, most of what we know from the Heian era is based off of the art and culture of these wealthy clans. Think like literary works like The Tale of Genji came from this time. And this is because rich people in this period were so rich that they had all the time in the world to philosophize and make art like 24/7. On the other hand, we do know that they ran a terrible and oppressive economy to keep themselves extremely rich. Like I mentioned, they took away a lot of public farmland that people had previously been making good money working, and they privatized it to drive down labor costs and sell things at higher prices, so the common people this time were poor as shit. Sukuna would have been a part of this peasantry, since we know he's not born to any of the major sorcerer clans. In his early years, he would have probably been starving, around death and disease constantly. We'll come back to this later, but it's something to keep in mind. And so basically what this all tells us is that during the Nara era before Sukuna and the Heian era that he lived in, the literal structure of the Jujutsu world as we understand it now was created. Tengen and his barrier techniques started going up, and the clans who governed the politics of the Jujutsu world, even up to the modern day, were all established during this time. This is the beginning of the Jujutsu world's power structure. But how does it affect our characters? Toji Zenin was born into the powerful sorcerer clan, the Zenin family, but he has no cursed energy or cursed technique because of his heavenly restriction, which takes away the cursed technique he normally would have had, and instead gifts him supreme physical abilities. We don't actually get a lot explicitly shown to us of his childhood, but we do know that he was rejected and mistreated by the clan in a similar way that Maki is later in the story. He's a very powerful sorcerer. I mean, that's obviously undeniable, but since his power wasn't based in the clan's traditional jujutsu, they can't accept him. He falls out of line with their established way of doing things. And this may seem like a small problem, but the clan is extremely conservative. Right, they want to keep things as they are, they want to preserve tradition, and they've built their power on strong sorcerers who have powerful hereditary techniques that they've bred into their bloodline. So for a clan trying to conserve their status in the Jujutsu world through powerful Jujutsu sorcerers, any outside power that comes from a non-Jujutsu source threatens the clan's own power. We'll explain this a little more thoroughly with Maki if it doesn't make sense now, so hold that thought. Anyway, Toji leaves the clan and becomes an assassin, earning the moniker Sorcerer Killer, until he eventually settles down with a nice lady, and he makes this guy, but then she dies and he's heartbroken and also, broken, so he has to get back into the assassin game, and he takes a job from the Star religious group that worships Tengen. The job is to kill Riko Amanai, the Star Plasma vessel. Riko is this, destined perfect vessel for Tengen, which Tengen needs since his immortality technique lets him live forever, but it doesn't let him stay eternally young. So every 500 years, he has to absorb a young person to remain young himself, because apparently if he gets too old, he loses his consciousness and ascends onto a higher plane of being, which sounds cool, but since his barrier techniques are so important to the Jujutsu world, him losing his conscious self and dropping his techniques could be the end of Jujutsu society as we know it. So protecting Riko from assassins like Toji is a big deal. So then who gets the job? 2 teenagers. Now, Gojo and Geto are probably the 2 strongest sorcerers of this era, so I don't think Tengen is necessarily entirely wrong in picking them. But it's important to remember they are still kids at this point. They do take on the mission, but first, they hoop. And they have this really interesting argument in the gym worthy of remembering for later. They're talking about the need to protect non-sorcerers, and Geto thinks that in an ideal society, weakness would be the ultimate virtue, and strength would be discouraged. Gojo thinks that that's bullshit, and that being strong gives you the right to behave how you please. If you're not strong enough to stop Gojo, you didn't deserve to anyway. We'll circle back to that later. They decide to take on the mission, and things are going pretty smoothly at first until Amanai's guardian, Kuroi, gets taken away. Kuroi, whatever, gets taken away to Okinawa and held hostage there. They rescue her, but this whole ordeal taxes Gojo pretty heavily since he's got to check everyone on the plane there and back, and he has to keep his technique active at all times. It's important to remember that infinity at this point is something Gojo has to actively maintain. Later in the season, we see him learn the ability to automate it, so it burns a lot less cursed energy and only turns on when something dangerous is coming towards him, but for the duration of the Okinawa trip, he can't let go of his technique ever for fear of getting surprise attacked, and that means he can't even sleep. And this is all to Toji's plan. See, Toji went to see Gojo when he was just a little kid, and Gojo noticed Toji standing behind him. Toji is totally shocked by this because normally his lack of cursed energy makes him impossible to detect for most sorcerers. From this moment forward, Toji realized how powerful Gojo really was, and he devises his plan to wear Gojo down before attacking him, because he knows that in a head-to-head fight, he'll probably lose. He uses Okinawa as a way to tire Gojo out and waits to strike until Gojo feels he's safe inside Jujutsu High's boundary and drops his technique. Gojo was the first limitless curse technique user born with the 6 eyes in a very, very long time. This combination of traits is unbelievably powerful, as we all know, and it's very rare, and the Gojo clan has been carefully breeding this through their bloodline for generations. Gojo is like the ideal child. He's born to a major sorcerer clan with the clan's ultimate technique. He's literally born straight at the top of the power structure of the Jujutsu world. He is the most powerful sorcerer from one of the most powerful clans. Toji, on the other hand, is born at the bottom. He's rejected by his clan from birth because he lacks a curse technique entirely. Toji doesn't kill him in one blow, but he does finish their fight pretty quick, using a cursed tool taken from the Zenin clan's storeroom to negate Gojo's limitless technique. This fight is Toji exploiting Gojo's immaturity as a sorcerer. Again, a couple months later, he wouldn't have had to worry about burning all that curse energy on Limitless. So this kind of serves as a reminder to us that Gojo is still just a 16-year-old kid. He's still growing up. In the meantime, Geto gives Amanai the option to choose whether she wants to be assimilated or not, and she decides to live. This totally rejects the will of the power structure, and could fundamentally disrupt their strength. After all, if they lose Tengen, it could be all over for Jujutsu Society as it is now. But Gojo and Geto decided before the mission that they were willing to risk shaking everything up because they truly believe in themselves as the strongest, and they don't fear a changing world like the higher-ups of Jujutsu do. If it's what Amanai wants, then they'll protect that, even if it puts the world around them in extreme danger. But, as we know, she doesn't actually get her chance at life. Toji kills her, securing his bag and completing the mission, but he still takes a minute to beat Geto's ass. Toji returns Riko's body to the Star Religious Group's leader, and he gives like a whack speech about profiting from religion and explains that Nara-era lore that we talked about before. Anyway, you know what's next. Gojo awakens and kills Toji. And Toji, before dying, has this really interesting train of thoughts here. He says, I wanted to reject him, the pinnacle of the Jujutsu world and the Zenin clan that rejected me. I twisted myself to try and affirm myself. For years, Toji's been unwittingly resisting the system and rejecting his upbringing. What this really means for Toji is that he is well aware of the fact that he is the bottom of the system fighting the top of the system. I mean, he calls Gojo the pinnacle of the Jujutsu world. If Toji could kill Gojo in this moment, it would mean that everything that the clan was trying to preserve by rejecting him would have been wrong. Their tradition around breeding in these powerful techniques and building everything around jujutsu sorcery and rejecting any kind of change, all of that is done to try and create people like Gojo, who can guarantee them immense power over the jujutsu world. And if Toji could kill Gojo in this moment, he could prove that that way of thinking is flawed, that there's nothing wrong with him, that he really should have never been treated so cruelly. But even after Gojo kills him, he still gets one last stab at the system. With his last words, Toji mentions his son, Megumi, who is going to be sold off to the Zenin clan soon. Now, Megumi has a lot in common with Gojo. He's inherited the strongest technique of the Zenin clan, the Ten Shadows technique. And Toji knows exactly what Megumi's fate will be with the clan. He'll become powerful, but he'll live a loveless life surrounded by power-hungry people who will treat him like a weapon more than a person. And so by mentioning Megumi, he gives Gojo the option to show him a different path. And I think that that's really appropriate considering how much the two have in common. Like, Gojo can make the assessment on whether clan life is best for Megumi based on his own experiences being the most powerful figure of a clan like this. Anyway, Gojo takes him in, of course, but that's for later. In the aftermath of this situation, Gojo begins working a lot more individually, so Geto is also forced to take on more and more missions alone. The trauma of the experience they've just had is seriously weighing on Geto. I mean, they just lost a friend and he almost died, and they're still just kids. Geto begins to question the value of non-sorcerers after seeing the cruelty of the Star Religious Group and almost dying to Toji. Why does he protect these people? I mean, every day in trying to save non-sorcerers, Geto has to swallow curses, which are literally made of the energy that leaks out from the negative feelings of those same non-sorcerers. Their fear, regret, shame, hatred, those are all things that Geto literally has to taste on every mission. I mean, it's no mistake that the taste of curses is compared to shit and vomit. Those are the nastiest physical secretions of humans, so it's fitting that things made from people's nastiest emotional secretions also taste like that. Geto can't separate people from the curses they create in the same way other people can. Around this time, Yuki Tsukumo comes to visit and explains to Geto that the Jujutsu world just treats symptoms by killing curses. She's interested in curing cursed energy entirely. Her ultimate goal is to rid the world of cursed spirits, and she sees two ways to do this. One is to totally eliminate cursed energy in everyone, which is why she wanted to study Toji, since he's the only example of cursed energy dropping to absolute zero. And the other is to make it possible for everyone to control their cursed energy, like how sorcerers do, since sorcerers don't leak enough cursed energy to contribute to the creation of curses. And Geto mentions a third possibility. If non-sorcerers create curses, what if you just killed all of the non-sorcerers? Then cursed spirits wouldn't appear anymore and Jujutsu sorcerers could live in peace. Soon after, Haibara dies, and Geto becomes even more disillusioned. It's also notable that Haibara died because him and Nanami were sent on a mission that they were too young and unprepared for, that hadn't been vetted properly. The power structure in the Jujutsu schools that's supposed to be protecting these children from the dangers of being a sorcerer are not working at all. Geto's final breaking point comes when he finds the girls, Mimiko and Nanako, beaten and abused in a village where cursed spirits have been wreaking havoc. Geto kills the cursed spirit that's been causing the village's problems, and he insists that these disturbances will stop happening. But the people of the village continue to blame the disturbances on the girls. Geto, totally enraged by this, kills the entire village and then kills his own family. This steals his resolve to go with the third plan, killing all non-sorcerers in order to eliminate cursed spirits forever. So in the next part, we're going to talk about Gojo and Geto's conversation, and we're definitely going to go totally back over that in the next section of the video when we're talking about the next term. But from a power structure analysis perspective here, I think it's best to think of Geto like a crooked cop in a way. As Geto's put it, he's seen the ugliness of the masses. He's seen the bad things that non-sorcerers can do, and he thought that he was okay with that. He thought that he understood that and was still willing to save them. But as time goes on and he sees more and more evil, he starts resenting the people that he's been trying to protect. In the structure of the Jujutsu world, Jujutsu sorcerers are supposed to be the barrier between regular human society and the evil of cursed spirits.
Kind of like how a cop should theoretically stand between regular people and criminals.
And after seeing Jujutsu sorcerers killed in defense of non-sorcerers, seeing Jujutsu sorcerers punished by non-sorcerers simply for being Jujutsu sorcerers, and by seeing the absolute endless war that's being fought here, if cursed spirits never stop being created, Geto turns on the people that he was once supposed to protect. He breaks the barrier between cursed spirits and human society, and decides to take down the people he was once supposed to save. So yeah, then we get the fated conversation. Gojo meets up with Geto in Tokyo, and Geto explains his plan to Gojo, who calls him crazy for thinking he can kill all non-sorcerers. In return, Geto says that Gojo could probably actually do it if he really wanted to. He says that nobody could actually stop Gojo if Gojo decided to execute his plan, and that Gojo is saying something is impossible for him that would be totally possible for Gojo himself. And this is where I want to circle back to Geto's original idea that we see in the gym scene: protect the weak and discourage the strong. Geto's ideals circle around this thought that weakness is the ultimate human virtue in a society because it forbids you from taking power from others. Strength is sinful because it gives you power over others, so restricting it is important if you want to live in an equal and fair world. And Gojo disagrees with this at the time, believing that his strength is the ultimate virtue because it gives him so much power over others. Geto eventually drops this ideology because he believes that in the current system, Jujutsu sorcerers are already punished so much for protecting the weak. Like we mentioned a couple times now, after losing friends, nearly dying himself, and having to actually swallow curses, the embodiment of the negative feelings of the people he's been trying to save, Geto loses it. Geto decides to stop punishing himself by saving these people, and he begins to use his strength to take care of other Jujutsu sorcerers, pursuing a world without curses. From their conversation, he says, "I've decided how to live my life. Now it's just a matter of doing my best to achieve that." But the worst part about this, in a way, is that it totally defaults all responsibility for protecting the Jujutsu world and the human world onto Gojo. I really do think Geto doesn't believe he'll ever even get close to achieving his goals. I mean, he makes it pretty clear that Gojo could easily stop him in his speech, so I do think that this is more kind of just sparing his feelings in a way. He knows no matter what, as long as Gojo decides he's doing the wrong thing, it doesn't matter what he wants. But that information is crushing for Gojo. Here, by making this choice, Geto is freed of the responsibility both for protecting the weak and for making the morally just choices that he was making for the two of them before. I think the most explicit example of this happens here when Gojo recovers Riko's body from the Star Religious group and he asks if they should kill all of the Star Religious people. And Geto has to take on the burden of saying no matter how much he might want to do it too. Gojo brings that up in their conversation too when he says, I thought we weren't allowed to kill people for no reason. But the problem is, Geto has found his reason. Worst of all is that Geto gave him this whole speech about his plan knowing that he was essentially offering himself up to get killed by Gojo. I mean, if Gojo lets this purple rip here, it's over for Geto, but he leaves that choice in Gojo's hands. He says, if you want to kill me, then kill me. There would be a point to that. In a way, he's kind of saying that everyone he kills from here on is blood on Gojo's hands, since he had the choice to get rid of him before he could execute his plan. He lets Gojo choose in this moment, and Gojo can't bring himself to kill his best friend. From this point forward, they're no longer the strongest together, and the responsibility for everyone's safety is thrust onto Gojo's shoulders alone. Since he is so powerful, if Gojo disagrees with someone, he can stop them, and if Gojo agrees with someone, he can guarantee their ideals with his protection. But this means that Gojo has to make the determination for everyone, because no one will ever be able to stop him, even if everyone disagrees with his ideals. He ultimately has to decide who to protect and what's moral for the entire world all by himself, because there's no one who can check him. Ultimately, the Gojo we see in the main series is literally tasked with holding the world together. Like I said, we'll talk about the Are You Gojo question later in the section with our next term, but for now, that's it on hidden inventory, so let's move on to JJK0. First, though, I want to remind you that if it feels like I'm leaving out important details about the story or characters, it's because I'm focusing solely on stuff that has to do with the Jujutsu world's power structure right now. So, like in this next section, I'm not going to talk about Yuta's motivations for becoming a sorcerer, which are really important to the story, but they just don't fit with this section of the video, so we're going to go over it quick. I hope that's okay. Anyway, Yuta curses his childhood best friend and love, Rika Amanai, after she dies in a car accident. He can't accept her death, so he turns her into the cursed spirit that we see in JJK0 so that she'll live on with him forever. He doesn't realize this at first, though. That's revealed later, but we're going quick now, so whatever. Like we mentioned earlier, he's descended from a similar line of powerful sorcerers as Gojo. They share a common ancestor, and apparently he's descended from the Fujiwara clan. So he is a really, really talented sorcerer. You guys, I also want to say I'm so proud of doing that 10 minutes of research. This all comes together in such a cool way. When we talk about Sukuna during the Shibuya incident, you're going to see very, very neat. It doesn't ever really get explained in the manga, to be honest, but still very cool. Gojo takes in Yuta, which is the first time that we see him directly reject a request from the higher-ups. They wanted to have him killed because Rika has hurt a lot of civilians and even multiple sorcerers, but Gojo sees a lot of potential in him, so he gets Yuta's execution suspended. The higher-ups then really, really want Yuta dead after the incident where Rika fully manifests at the school, but Gojo basically tells them, if you try and kill him, I'll kill you. But we'll talk about that more later. Also, sorry, I'm saying we'll talk about that more later 100 times. Gojo also says soon after this, on like kind of a side note here, no one's allowed to take youth away from young people. And youth is very, very important to JJK, especially for Gojo and Nanami. They are always trying to protect these children because they were not protected when they were children. This will come up 100 more times. Anyway, Panda does sexy talk, Yuta does a lot of training, and then the night parade of 100 demons happens, yada yada yada. Yuta blows up Geto, and this is where Gojo and Geto's story comes to a close. Gojo finally has to accept the need to kill his one true best friend. Honestly, I think that killing Geto is a gigantic step for Gojo's character. As a kid, he wasn't able to do what he felt he had to do because he hadn't developed his own moral viewpoints on the world enough to be certain that it was the right decision. He had all of the power, but he was powerless to use it. That lasts until this moment, when it is now certainly clear to Gojo that killing Geto is his best path forward. To me, this shows he's finally figured out how to direct his power. He's found a vision for the world that he's going to use his strength to pursue, and Geto is antithetical to that vision. But what is his vision? Well, we'll find that out in Season 1. Halftime chat, I will say here that since Hidden Inventory and JJK0 are like setting the background events for the JJK story, and a power structure is like the background for things that happen in a society, I don't know if that really holds, but whatever. There's just less power structure stuff that happens in Season 1 and 2, so we're going to be skipping around a lot more. So prepare yourselves. Season 1 starts the same way as JJK0, as Yuji Itadori is set to be executed after absorbing Sukuna's finger, but again Gojo steps in and blocks his execution. He gets the higher-ups to agree to let Yuji live temporarily as he ingests the rest of Sukuna's fingers, at which point he will be executed. Again, they don't really have a say though, since they can't exactly make Gojo do anything he doesn't want to. The higher-ups have a workaround prepared this time though, and only a few weeks into Yuji becoming a sorcerer, they send Yuji, Megumi, and Nobara to a juvenile detention facility, which has been taken over by a powerful curse. Now, it's not certain that they know what's waiting inside, which is one of the Sukuna's finger curses, but they definitely know this mission will be too high level for the group, and they expect Yuji to die here. This lets them kill Yuji while having plausible deniability to Gojo so that he won't just go wild and kill them in retaliation. Of course, though, Yuji isn't actually killed by the curse, he gets killed by Sukuna, who takes over his body long enough to fight Megumi and learn about the massive potential Megumi is holding within him. We're talking about Maharaga here. In the observation room with Yuji's body, Gojo explains that he believes the higher-ups planted the finger and sent Yuji on that mission to try and kill him. He also explains to Ijichi that he doesn't believe he's suited to being a teacher, but he's decided to be a teacher to pursue his dream. Gojo tells us that the top of the jujutsu world is comprised of arrogant, traditional, and conservative, wink wink, fools, and he wants to reset the jujutsu world with all of them removed. In a way, his opposition seems a little random, but look at it this way. So Gojo was raised as a part of a clan, and he's technically the head of the Gojo clan, but he wants nothing to do with clan life. He lost 2 friends to a man who was sent down a dark path because his talent was rejected in the name of tradition. More accurately speaking here, he lost 2 friends because, as only teenagers, him and his friends were pitted up against the most powerful sorcerer in the world, a sorcerer who was rejected by the power structure, and they fought in the name of protecting that power structure. In return, the power structure continued sending them on dangerous, risky missions and drove his friend crazy. When he talks about protecting youth, which he'll continue to do throughout season 1 or 2, he's not just saying nice platitudes. This structure robbed him of his youth, his friends, and it has made him responsible for balancing the world on his shoulders since he was a child. Where Geto went the crooked cop direction and turned his frustration with the horrible way things were run down on the people he was supposed to be protecting, Gojo turns his frustration up on the people that were supposed to be protecting him. Gojo comes out and says that he would literally just go and kill them all, but he thinks that they would be replaced, and also nobody would probably follow him because it would just look really bad. To circumvent this, he's gotten into education, in his words, to raise up strong and clever comrades. He wants a generation of sorcerers who share his ideals and who can rebuild the jujutsu world together, and maybe, even, just maybe, become strong enough to be able to take down Gojo himself, and finally let him drop some of the responsibility he's been holding for so long. This is the worldview that Gojo settled on, which allowed him to kill Geto and start using his power really actively towards his goals. This is why he protects Yuta and Yuji from the higher-ups. His strength wasn't enough. I mean, he says that directly after Geto's speech. And so now he's turned to relying on strength that he can build in others. He confirms this too in a later conversation about this event with Gakuganji, who is the principal of Kyoto's Jujutsu school and is clearly a powerful figure among the higher-ups. Gojo drops this quote, "The wave of power you guys have been trying to hold back with your useless status and traditions has grown bigger than you can handle and is now descending upon us." What Gojo is talking about here is the level of curses and sorcerers who have been appearing since basically the time of his birth. He notes the disaster curses and his students, especially Yuta and a new character in Season 3, Hikari, as big examples of the fact that Jujutsu is really ramping up. And we know this is something that's true about Jujutsu generally. In eras like the Heian era, where sorcerers who are very high level start getting born, more sorcerers and curses who are very high level start getting born to match them. This power increase threatens to destabilize the power structure that Gakuganji is a part of, and Gojo welcomes this sort of revolutionary chaos with open arms. Gojo's excited for the evolution of the Jujutsu world, while Gakuganji knows that this evolution could end up seriously changing things as they are and have historically been, something which is very threatening for people at the top of an existing hierarchy. Basically, if you're at the top and things change, the only way you can move is down. That is kind of the core feature of conservatism. You're trying to prevent change, not just because you believe in tradition, but it's also usually because within that traditional structure, you have one of the seats at the top. And that is kind of, I think, one of the better distillations of how conservatism works. There are certainly people who believe in conservative ideologies because they want to preserve tradition, but a lot of the people who propagate conservative ideals are at the top of an existing hierarchy, which is supported by certain traditional values, and they don't want those values to get challenged, or they might lose their spot at the top of society. Anyway, the whole Mahito saga is mostly related to our second term, so we're skipping a lot of that for now, but we've got to talk about Nanami before we fully move on past this. So during the fight at Junpei's school, Nanami gets caught in Mahito's domain expansion, and before he's about to die, his life basically flashes before his eyes. In this flashback, we see the era of Nanami's life where he worked as a salaryman, sometime between his graduation from Jujutsu High and his return to work as a sorcerer. Over his years at the company he worked at, Nanami was slowly worn down by the meaninglessness of the job he was doing. He keeps his head down and he works hard, trying to make enough money to retire young and not have to work at all anymore, but he kind of reaches a breaking point. One day, he's going into the bakery he always gets his lunch from, and he talks to the girl working there, explaining that while his job pays well, all he does is make rich people even richer. He says that her job at the bakery is within the natural cycle of life because she actively provides something that everyone needs, food. But Nanami still makes more money than her, even though all he's doing is moving around invisible value to give more to people who already have what they need. This, folks, is a pretty direct critique of capitalism. Since Nanami doesn't feel he's impacting anything real, he feels no connection to the work he does every day and falls into depression. The bakery girl, on the other hand, can see the happy faces of her customers when she makes a good sandwich, and that sandwich provides tangible sustenance, so she's much more fulfilled in her job. That is kind of what labor alienation is. And it's ultimately the reason Nanami returns to Jujutsu sorcery. All these years, she's had this fly head curse sitting on her shoulder, and he finally decides to kill it because helping this person is something that actually matters. He actually makes her life better, and so he decides to return to being a sorcerer. We're going to talk about Nanami a little bit later, so, keep that backstory in mind. Next up is the Kyoto Sister School Exchange event, which starts with Yuji's reintroduction, and Gakuganji is not happy about that at all. So during the event, Gakuganji plans to have Itadori killed, introducing a curse that's far stronger than for the normal events, and giving Kamo the ability to control it. He chooses Kamo to do this because of his connection to the clans. One day, Kamo will become a clan leader, and thus a higher-up. So Sukuna's potential for unpredictable destruction via Yuji is something that threatens Kamo in the same way it does Gakuganji and the other higher-ups. Now, we get a bunch of character stories through the fights that happen in the exchange event, and Noritoshi Kamo's is one of them that we really got to get into because he, like Gojo and Megami, has inherited the flagship technique of his clan, blood manipulation. Like I said, he's slated to become clan leader, but he reveals that he's not actually a legitimate child of the clan leader. His mom was actually the clan leader's mistress, but his real wife couldn't have a kid with the technique, so they were forced to take on Kamo as the clan's heir. He accepts this responsibility to try and protect his mom, who was mistreated despite giving them the child that they needed. And also kind of sidebar here, but he makes a weird remark about how he wishes Maki or Mai got the Ten Shadows technique instead of Megami, probably so that they could have a weird clan alliance marriage or something. He takes this job way too serious, but yeah, whatever, that's his deal. Nobara and Nishimiya's fight also digs into the jujutsu power structure pretty heavily as well, but I want to give her own video because that conversation is kind of more complicated, and I don't know probably like enough about feminism to just talk about this off my ass, so I probably need to research a little bit. I'm filming this like 2 days before season 3 comes out, so like I need to freaking pump out this video. This is going to be a crazy edit, but whatever. I'll make a Nobara video one day because she's like one of my favorite characters. But if you want to see a video about her, let me know in the comments down below. Hit that like button and subscribe, baby. The other main notable fight when we're talking about power structures is, of course, Maki versus Mai. This, in my opinion, is incredibly important to understanding JJK and is wildly relevant to Season 3. Please, if you listen to nothing else today, listen to this. The sisters are born to Ogi Zenin, who is the brother of the Zenin clan leader, Naobito. Mai has a cursed technique but is very weak, and Maki has no technique at all since she has a heavenly restriction, like Toji. Both were treated as disappointments, and they were going to spend the rest of their lives being servants. Mai, at the time, was okay with this. She says she'd have just been fine sucking it up and doing chores peacefully for the rest of their lives, and she wanted Maki to, in her words, stay at the bottom with her. Maki, though, felt like she would hate herself if she stayed with the clan and served people that she hated for her whole life. She knows there's more for her out there in the real world. Maki wanted a life that she could be proud of living, so she leaves the clan and tells Naobito that she will become the clan leader one day. This is a direct challenge to his authority and to the clan's rejection of her. And for doing this, Naobito decides to punish Maki, blocking her progress towards this goal at every step. In particular, the example that we see here is Maki not being able to get promoted beyond grade 4 as a sorcerer. That means that she can't take on individual missions, and she gets paid less for her work, which is a clear abuse of the influence Naobito's place in the power structure gives him. Again, though, we see that the people in power cannot abandon their virtues and adapt even when they already know how poorly this story ends. Naobito knows how powerful Maki can be. I mean, they've seen this all play out not 30 years ago. However, for a conservative who has built their power on ancient ideas and practices, conceding to any change is conceding to the possibility of others. Naobito only has power because enough people agreed to participate in the structure we call the Zenin clan. There are people like Mai who have accepted that negative treatment as long as it guarantees them relatively safe and relatively peaceful lives. But if tomorrow they all decided they didn't want to listen to him and they rejected his strength, like Maki did, his power would disappear. If things like tradition and the way things have been done become challengeable ideas, then people like Naobito become challengeable authorities. So even when the system is proven wrong, for a conservative at the top of a hierarchy like this, the system can still never be challenged without threatening its collapse. In this way, Naobito just has to try and stop Maki from becoming who he absolutely knows she can't be. The baseball episode is another cute example of this stuff at work. Gojo challenges the traditional structure of the exchange event itself by changing the second day's event from being a bunch of individual battles into a baseball game. This totally aligns with its ideals more closely because it's about having fun and being kids, more than becoming effective sorcerers, and this encourages cooperation over individuality. This is actually like weirdly kind of a deep episode when you get into it, but anyway, on to the Shibuya incident. Just after 7 p.m. on October 31st in Shibuya, a veil comes down. This veil keeps in regular people, but sorcerers and assistants can pass through freely. Around the same time, a bunch of people are sucked into the train station, and people by the veil begin calling out Gojo by name. The higher-ups decide to send Gojo into the obvious trap and have the other sorcerers stay outside to minimize casualties. But as Panda points out, this only really stops sorcerer casualties and totally puts Gojo at risk. I wonder if that will matter. At 8:31, Gojo enters the Veil. He heads to the train station where a bunch of people have been packed in trying to leave on the subway, and he finds Choso, Hanami, and Jogo on the bottom floor. Down here, Gojo gets sealed in, and the curses begin killing all of the non-sorcerers around him. Their plan is pretty simple, but very effective. They're going to try and wear Gojo out by killing off humans, using hit-and-run tactics with domain amplification, and try to restrict his usage of his abilities by surrounding him with innocent non-sorcerers. Obviously, his best play here would be to just open Infinite Void, but doing so would mean killing all the non-sorcerers, and as Jogo says, Gojo can accept deaths from people killed by cursed spirits, not deaths from people killed by Satoru Gojo. We get kind of an intermission here between episodes where we get interviews of everybody getting asked about Gojo, and they all list certain traits that they think about him, but ultimately all of the interviews end with them saying that he is the strongest. And from here we see that there is literally no amount of constraint that the cursed spirits can lay down that will be enough. Gojo squishes Hanami literally just by projecting Limitless and is beating the absolute shit out of Jogo until he decides to just start running around and hiding from Gojo, which kind of stalemates things because Gojo can't really catch Jogo if Jogo can keep using people as cover. In this moment, Gojo kind of resigns himself to accepting these sacrifices in exchange for promising to make sure he exorcises Jogo and Choso. Down the tunnel, Geto 2, I don't think I've mentioned yet, actually. But yeah, Geto's back. We're going to call him Geto 2. I mean, you already know more information about him, but whatever. His name's Geto 2 for now. He says that this amount of pressure isn't nearly enough, and that they need him much more on edge. How do they do that? Well, there's a plan at a second train station. So there's a smaller veil that goes up at a station not far from Shibuya at Meiji Shrine. It's like literally one stop up. Google Maps here. People in that station are being funneled into the lower levels by transfigured humans on the higher levels. And there's a bottom barrier there that keeps out sorcerers, but is letting all the humans in. Mei, Wee Wee, and Yuji go down to find out what's going on, but they get there too late. The plan here was actually to fill up the train with transfigured humans and send them over to kill everyone who's in the station with Gojo. They let a bunch more people onto the bottom floor at the same time that the transfigured humans arrive, which means that Gojo has to try and find a way to save double the regular people against 100 times the enemies. As Mahito says, the scales he was previously using to judge an acceptable level of death get totally thrown off by the introduction of more living innocent people and a higher rate of dying simultaneously. The disaster curses are going wild, killing everyone they can, and the transfigureds are eating people left and right, and Gojo is all alone, forced to deal with these impeccably designed set of anti-Gojo circumstances that Geto 2 has meticulously laid out. But even this isn't enough. Gojo unleashes an extremely fast and limited domain, with an instinctual time set to allow regular humans to survive it with no after effects, while simultaneously frying the brains of the disaster curses and transfigured humans for sufficiently long enough to eliminate every single transfigured human in the station. Gojo is unstoppable. That is, until the prison realm appears. Gojo goes to move away instinctually until his old friend pops up. All it really takes is a brief second of reflecting and trying to figure out who Geto is for Gojo to be sealed. He can see that the body and the cursed energy match, even to the power of his 6 eyes, but his soul knows that this can't be right. And that's when we get the brain reveal. Of course, it's not Geto, it's something else living inside of him. Ultimately here, Gojo's defining trait, as we see in the interviews, even despite his new approach to life, will always be his strength. That's how everyone else views him. He's the ultimate weapon against cursed spirits, this perfect, unkillable being. In this fight, he pretty much shows us why. He dispatches every possible anti-Gojo plan that they could come up with one by one with his incredible technique and his even more incredible intelligence and mastery of Jujutsu sorcery. A lot of people like to talk about Gojo in terms of him being defined by like a fatal character flaw like hubris, but I just don't think that that's really the point with him. Usually when arrogance is punished as a fatal flaw in stories, it's because a character overestimates or overtrusts themselves and is humbled for it, or it's because they take on too much responsibility. Gojo, though, he never really falters because of competence or ability, and it's not really his choice to go into the barrier alone. The higher-ups decided that for him. Gojo doesn't get sealed necessarily because he's overconfident in his abilities. He gets sealed because he's a human being and he's getting treated like he's something else. Even though Gojo is truly the strongest, the ultimate jujutsu sorcerer, seeing the face of his reanimated dead best friend when he's so worn out from fighting to try and save others gives him just enough pause that he can be sealed. Ultimately, Gojo doesn't get sealed here because he overestimated his abilities in any way. I mean, even if he slightly might have, the reality is that he gets sealed because he's just a guy. And despite being so powerful, despite the entire Jujutsu world looking at him as this kind of ultimate weapon, he still has enough of a human heart to be slowed down for just 60 seconds. And Geto 2 exploits that. After Gojo's sealed, the other squads enter the barrier, and we get this little conversation where Ino talks about the power structure of the Jujutsu world now that Gojo is gone pretty explicitly. He mentions the dynamic between the clans and all the people like Yuji that he was protecting that are now at risk, and then all the curses and curse users who have gone into hiding in fear of him, how they might come out. Essentially, the power structures of the Jujutsu world are currently heavily organized around the influence that Gojo's ability to kill everything exerts. Like, Yuji is only safe because Gojo is holding the clans back. There's stuff like this happening all over this world surrounding Gojo's power. So when he leaves the picture, there will be a huge chain reaction of people vying for power or seeking to attain goals or statuses that he was previously blocking them from getting. Back to our definition, Gojo's technique gives him power and influence over others in society. But now there is a vacuum of power created in his wake. I think you already understood that, but I'm using my breakdown voice, so blah blah blah, I'm a dumb idiot, whatever. Toji also makes his return around here, hijacking a body that he was reanimated into. From here, he acts purely on instinct, taking down the most powerful sorcerer that he can find around him at any given time, which is another suggestion of his subconscious desire to challenge the people who once used their place at the top of the power structure to abuse and degrade him. This goes on for some time, as we know, but importantly, it ends when he comes face to face with Megumi, and he gets snapped back into his conscious self for a moment. He asks Megumi his last name, and when Megumi replies that it's Fushiguro, he says, "It's not Zenin, I'm glad," and then kills himself instead of killing his son. Now, this could mean a lot of things, but in my eyes, it goes kind of like this. When he's reanimated, Toji is operating on his base instinct to reject the powerful, and he senses the powerful hereditary technique of the Zenin clan in his son, so he attacks. When he gets close enough to realize that it is his son, though, his rage subsides for just a moment. His humanity returns, just for long enough for him to check to see what the fate of his child has been. Upon hearing that his final act of telling Gojo about Megumi was successful, and knowing that he freed his son from the brutality and lovelessness of the power-hungry clan system, he no longer feels this instinctual drive to take on the powerful anymore. Because now he knows, in at least his own little way, that he's finally won. Next up, we get Sukuna versus Jogo, which I think is incredibly interesting. The fight itself is really beautifully animated. Sukuna whips Jogo's booty. He's really just enjoying this, testing out the limits of Jogo's power. They have this contest of firepower here. Sukuna wants to beat Jogo at his own game. This is really one of the first times that we see Sukuna showing his true nature. He loves Jujutsu sorcery, and he likes to see the most powerful applications of it that he can. If you can't say a lot of nice things about Sukuna, you can at least say he's got love for the game. But then, Sukuna does something interesting. He appears in Jogo's soul after his death. He tells Jogo, "You should have just burnt everything down," implying that Jogo's weakness came from him having too strict of ideals and schemes, and that real power like Sukuna's comes from just destroying everything around you until nothing more powerful than you remains, which I think is incredibly telling of how Sukuna sees the world. As mentioned earlier, Sukuna likely would have been born into the peasant class during the Heian era. As just a reminder to go over the history again, this period was ruled by clans, like the world of JJK in the modern era, and these clans became incredibly rich by privatizing previously public farmlands, so that they could pay workers less and sell goods at higher prices. This is the era of Japanese history in which the rich were the richest, and the powerful were the most exploitative toward the lower classes. To me, this makes a lot of sense out of Sukuna's ideals. Burning everything down until you're the most powerful is exactly what someone would want to do when they spent their whole childhood being exploited by powerful people. It's often said in JJK that Sukuna is guided by only his own pleasure and displeasure, killing whoever he wants, whenever he wants, all in pursuit of becoming more and more powerful until he reaches the pinnacle of sorcery. In a way, this shows the same kind of selfishness of the clans in his era. He's only concerned with gaining personal power, but he differs from them in that for Sukuna, he probably learned this selfishness as a survival technique. He lived in a control or be controlled world, where people at the top of the existing power structure only use their power for their own benefit, disregarding the people they were responsible for protecting. So to protect himself, Sukuna lashed out at the world, mastering Jujutsu and reigning over the Heian era. In real life, this era ended with a giant clan war, which was the Genpei War in 1185, and this was a horrific time to be a peasant, like even worse than before. The final year of the war was like Black Plague Europe levels of just a terrible time to be alive. The war itself was already brutal, and in this last year, on top of the violence, there was a massive earthquake, a huge typhoon, and widespread plague and famine. Sukuna's death marks the end of the Heian era in Jujutsu Kaisen, and in a way, he likely represents this war. This kind of makes sense of how he's compared to natural disasters a lot, and we know that the sorcerers of this era came together to bring him down and reined in a new era of Jujutsu sorcery afterwards. Similar to this, in Japan, the power structure changed after the Genpei War, with the first true shogun, at least as we know it today, like the military emperor ruler of Japan, rising to power in the wake of this war, and that system remained for nearly 800 years, basically up until Japan's modern era. In the modern era today, we live in a world where the rich are richer than they've ever been, and where people are as poor and disenfranchised as they've ever been. Our power structures are, I don't know if you can tell, but our power structures in the real world today are in the middle of failing us, and we can only hope that our reset doesn't have to be as bloody as the Genpei War or as the war on Sukuna. After this, Sukuna takes on Mahoraga, destroying most of Shibuya, and then after that, he switches back with Yuji. I just want to say this here, we're not really talking about Yuji because he's got much more to do with our second term. So sorry, Yuji, I love Yuji, but not today. We do have to talk about, though, the conclusion to Nanami's story. After Sukuna switches back, we see Nanami back in the station, brutally burnt by Jogo, taking on a bunch of transfigured humans. But in this moment, his mind's not on the battle, it's elsewhere. Nanami is thinking about how he always wanted to move to an isolated place in Malaysia, to read all the books he'd bought and hadn't read, and in his words, take back all the time I'd lost. Basically, I think this is the Japanese equivalent to American getting a house in Florida. He's talking about retirement here. That's further evidenced by the fact that he's talking about how tired he is, how he feels he has done enough. And in his last moments, when Mahito sneaks up behind him, he thinks of Hibara. He asks himself, why did I even come back here? Why did I put myself through this pain? As a man who wanted nothing but to retire, he spends his last day on Earth, heck, his last seconds on Earth, working harder than anyone else. But he gets his answer to that question, why did I come back, when Yuji shows up. I think he takes such a liking to Yuji because he reminds him so much of Hibara. I mean, It's no coincidence that the characters are so similar. And I think it's really important to Nanami that he tries to keep Yuji safe in a way that nobody ever kept him and Haibara safe. That was his reason for doing all this fighting, but now his time fighting has come to an end. And so before he dies, Nanami unburdens himself of the responsibility to protect others that he's been holding for so long. And in an act that he certainly seems to think is quite cruel, he leaves Yuji with these last words. And this, I think, is the best time to revisit Mei Mei. So Mei Mei wins her fight against the smallpox curse by sort of sacrificing Wee Wee. Now, like, he doesn't actually get sacrificed, he survives, but she makes him the target of the curse's domain, intentionally nearly killing him, but buying her the time that she needs to take down the cursed spirit. Wee Wee willingly participates in this because of his weird infatuation with her, which we see followed up in this hotel scene later on. While Nanami is brutally fighting till his last moments, Mei Mei uses the first opportunity she gets to retreat to a hotel. Where? Malaysia. Now, this is an important moment for understanding reading comprehension, so lock the fuck in. I'm about to go full teacher mode. Please lock in. When anything happens in a fictional story, the author chose for it to happen. What I mean by that is Gege made all of this up. So he also made up this weird sexual scene between Mei Mei and her little brother, who is a minor, and he chose to include that in the story. This totally doesn't fit with the rest of the vibe of JJK, so the whole community was asking when this came out, why did Gege choose to include this? I think I saw 1,000 TikToks the night that this episode came out being like, what the hell is Gege doing? Why was this included in the story at all? But for that reason, I think people actually mostly understand this scene and Mei Mei and Nanami's dynamic really well because everyone was forced to ask themselves this question. Sneakily, this is the key to gaining reading comprehension. You have to ask questions like this all the time. For example, earlier we asked, why does Gege keep bringing up the Heian era? And after some very quick research, we found it was the era of clan rule. I'm not a historian. I don't know anything about real history. I did 2 Googles, but it told me a lot. And this kind of question asking is how you understand stories. In particular here, I would say that having her go to Malaysia seems kind of random until you take Nanami into account. So in this way, Gege draws a really direct relationship between the two characters. We have Nanami, who stays back to fight and protect the children in Shibuya and ends up dead for it. And then on the other hand, Mei Mei, who sexually manipulates a child to get him to be willing to sacrifice himself for her. And she's the one that gets to escape. Exploitation is rewarded. Even more so as in this hotel scene, we see her talking to a contact about selling off certain financial assets that are bound to crash in value after the chaos caused by Gojo's stealing. I mean, she's literally doing like insider trading, sharing insider secrets from the Jujutsu world with finance people so that she can be more connected to money and ensure that she profits from the violence as much as possible. Nanami, a literal businessman always talking about work and retirement, and Mei Mei, the sorcerer who brings up pay the most, are the characters in the story particularly concerned with money. And so the conclusion of their involvement in the Shibuya incident implies a larger idea that Gege is trying to communicate to us about money through them, which is that money does not reward morality. It in fact really rewards stuff that's more like Mei Mei's selfishness and her willingness to exploit others. So remember, when watching or reading fiction, always think from the writer's perspective. The writer is a real person who made up this fake story. And almost always they are trying to use that story to tell you something about the world around you. When you are watching, and don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with just sitting back and watching JJK because it's fun and the fights are entertaining. But if you want to understand the stories, if you want to get the wisdom that people from around the world are trying to tell you through their art, you've got to ask these questions. Why did they decide to make these events happen? What does that choice to include these things tell us about the story? So like things that have happened previously or other characters, what does this event connect to around it? And then what does that event and its connection to the rest of the story tell us about real life?
Thank you so much for watching that. I'm going to cut it off there because a lot of the stuff that I talk about from that point forward is just kind of foreshadowing season 2 and foreshadowing season 3 and setting up a lot of the events that are kind of hinted at that lead to the culling games. Again, thank you so much for the support on this one. It has meant the world to me being able to see everybody like pop out and subscribe, and the support on the last couple videos has been absolutely amazing. It's been a lot more than anything I've ever seen on YouTube up to this point, and I'm really glad that everybody's showing up for this. Hopefully, like I said, at some point next week, I'm going to have a video that's going to be talking about Hikari and Nobara from the perspective of like a gender analysis of JJK, and I'm going to have a whole segment talking about Fight Club too, if you're interested in that. So yeah, check that out. If this is your first time seeing this video, thank you for stopping by. I'm assuming most of you that have actually watched this and stuck through it had already watched it, and were some of the people in the comments talking about you wanted to come back and rewatch it. I really appreciate the support on that. I really appreciate all the love for this video. This has been awesome. Thank you so much for popping out. And sorry I dragged my feet with this too. I was just trying to work on my other videos, and the last week has been kind of a wash, so I've been really taking my time with this thing for no reason. But thank you for stopping by, and catch you in the next one. Peace.